hopefully they're in the right spot. So let's see where we are.
Indeed.
But without the compromises forced upon the builder.
Does that look familiar?
As you recall, Aga,
We're close?
Yes.
when my father's first pyramid was half completed, cracks and faults began to form, and there was clearly instability within the structure.
Yes, I recall it well. So at that point, the architect decreased the angle of ascent to 43 degrees.
Leaving a structure which appears to hesitate on its rise toward the sun.
My father is not a man for hesitation.
But as your majesty sees in your father's second pyramid, the one to the north, the same slope is maintained throughout the height, rendering a perfect structure.
Not quite. You will build me a pyramid as daring as his first began, yet as massive as his second. In short, the greatest pyramid of all, so that no one who sees it can doubt the power and the glory of the King of Egypt, from now until the end of time. And you will build it not in the shadow of my father's pyramid at Dashur, but across the great virgin expanse at Giza.
It wasn't long before Amkat returned to the royal court at Memphis with his plans.
As it is customary, we will construct your necropolis on the west bank of the Nile, where the sunboat of your father is seen to set, where the passage to the next world begins. Now, the site your majesty so wisely chose allows us to build on a suitably splendid scale. Adjoining your great pyramid, we will place 3 smaller pyramids for your 3 gracious queens, as well as many tombs for the beloved members of your court.
While my father found favor with the plan, my mother had certain objections.
Since I am the main queen, it would seem only fitting that my pyramid be larger than the other 2.
You see, my queen,
It was my father's third queen, Ninutsu, who provided the logical explanation.
My dear, think of what you are saying. If your pyramid were to be built larger than those of the other queens, it would detract from the main pyramid of our Lord and Divine King.
Quite so, noble queen. As you see, my lord, the plan will afford a suitable location at the proper time for the pyramid of your successor.
My brave son, Kawa.
Your remaining children will continue surrounding you and serving you for all eternity in suitably impressive tombs.
My learned son, Hordedef, the scribe, will record your progress for me.
One further advantage of the Giza site, it is located just across the Nile from Tur, the finest limestone quarries in all your realm. When the river is at flood stage, it will be a relatively simple process to ferry the blocks across from the Tur. And we will have our main quarry close by to provide the thousands of blocks we will need for the inner core. And the site itself is now being cleared and leveled. And so that the pyramid may serve our king as his pathway to the imperishable stars, it must be laid out in precise relation to the 4 corners of the earth. Once completed, we will be ready to begin.
Now we are ready to begin. This way. It's all here, just as we suspected. Quickly now, gather everything together. Don't hold the door for us all night. Enoch. Yes. The cottage you. As always, your help is appreciated. The plan you drew was completely accurate.
It should be. I helped supervise the construction of this tomb myself.
And as always, your contribution is well rewarded.
Good, now go. If anyone finds out about this, the king himself will have me torn limb from limb.
As you see, Vordedef, the two rooms are already being chiseled out of the solid rock below ground level. These will serve as the tomb chamber and storage room, and will be entered through a gradually descending shaft. Two granite portcullises will be lowered to seal the entrance to your tomb chamber after burial. Once the tomb itself is complete, we can begin the first course of stones.
At which point, my father's pyramid begins its transformation from dream to reality.
Building elaborate tombs for the monarchs spanned the history of ancient Egypt, a history dominated by the belief that the god king, if properly cared for, would live forever to maintain and protect his people. We're in the impressive tomb of Seti I, who ruled this land 1,200 years after the events in our story. By Seti's time, the search for safe and practical ways to care for the monarch's body and afterlife had led away from the highly visible and monumental pyramids to secret tombs cut from the solid rock of southern Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Though the tombs in the valley were built many centuries after Khufu's time, the ideas about life and death are more clearly represented in these later paintings and drawings. A tomb like this would have been filled with religious objects, gold, jewels, and furniture. Everyday items such as food, drink, and clothing would have been brought each day by priests to an offering temple. After all, Seti would need to get dressed, eat, and be entertained here, just as he had been during his life on Earth. Built into the ancient Egyptian word for life was the assumption that we would each continue functioning forever. All classes believed in an afterlife. But remember, this afterlife was to be a perfect extension of life on Earth. So commoners would remain commoners, and kings would still be kings. So much for upward mobility. Egyptian attitudes towards death took centuries to develop. But a key concept that remains fairly consistent throughout this culture is that of the Ka. A tomb such as this would have been home to the Ka. It was the Ka for whom the tomb was decorated, for whom food and clothing were brought, and for whom the priests served. It is hard for us to understand exactly what the Ka was. One possible translation is double. Although the Egyptians didn't think of the Ka as we think of the soul, the ideas are somewhat similar. Long before the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, burial chambers for the nobility were often provided with special rooms for Ka statues, and all tombs had doors through which the Ka could receive the food and offerings left for it. Ka's statues helped reinforce the deceased's identity. In this tomb of Mereruka, a 6th dynasty royal official, the Ka statue is seen coming through the false door to receive its offering. Now, for all of these elaborate and costly rituals to do their job, that is, to sustain the dead person's existence, several things were necessary. His name had to be visible. This says, "Honored before the king, Mereruka." Then he had to have regular sustenance through offerings. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, his body had to remain not only intact, but identifiable to the Ka. This is Ramses II. Many people believe that this is the pharaoh Moses confronted in the biblical book of Exodus.
It was not
Few objects in history have evoked as much fear, superstition, and wonderment as mummies. They were thought to contain all sorts of magical properties. By the 16th century, mummy was a popular drug in apothecary shops throughout Europe. Egyptian tombs were constantly being ransacked, and their long-dead inhabitants ground up to supply this strange appetite. Throughout the evolution of the mummification process, natron was used. Natron, which literally means divine salt, was a powdery silt deposited on lake beds. The application of natron to the body and its subsequent draining, drying out, and wrapping took weeks. One crucial step in the successful preservation of bodies was discovered back in the 4th dynasty, long before Ramses here, with the removal of the internal organs. These are the canopic jars that held the removed organs, which were also mummified and entombed along with the body. A separate deity protected each organ: stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver. The heart was left in the body since it was thought to contain the essence of the individual. Oh, and the brain. They didn't know what it was for, so they just threw it away. Over the centuries, mummification and burial practices became more elaborate. Coffins eventually came to resemble the individuals inside. These mummiform coffins further identified the dead, particularly the deceased king, with the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld, who was always shown wrapped as if a mummy. The Osiris legend is one of the most potent and embracing themes in Egyptian thought and culture, about a god hero who died and then lived forever in the next world. It was a story at first only connected to kingship, but later developed to offer similar hope to all Egyptians.
You see, Khafra, it is the god Osiris who causes the waters of the Nile to rise every year in their season.
As a son of the king, I have many brothers and sisters, but of all of them, the one closest to my heart is my young brother Khafra, who shares my sense of wonder of the world.
Please tell me the story of Osiris again.
Osiris was king on earth long ago. He married Isis, and their good works were widely known. His brother Seth, whose rages were like a wounded hippopotamus, became jealous and plotted against him. He killed Osiris and rent his body into many pieces. Then he threw them into the river, where the current carried them swiftly away. Oh, the wailing of Isis, who would not forsake her dead husband. But the love of Isis could not be broken. With the help of the jackal-headed Anubis, she found the pieces of Osiris, and through her own powerful magic, put him back together. And he reigned over the kingdom of the dead, where he continues to this day. Isis then sent her son Horus the falcon to avenge the treachery against his father. While he is alive on earth, the king of Egypt is Horus, the vindicated and unvanquished. And when he leaves this earth, he becomes Osiris, ruler of the kingdom beyond.
And each new king becomes Horus and maintains the delicate balance of none.
Mother, will I become Horus one day too?
I do not think so, Khafra. Your brother Kawab is first in line to be king, but I am sure your future will also be great.
Yes, I think it will be.
As the years went by, it was easy to imagine the great things his mother predicted for him.
As before my very eyes, Khafra, you have grown tall and strong.
Thank you, Father. As you recall, son of Re, the 2 rooms have been cut out of the rock 15 feet below ground level and have been covered over by granite slabs. This is only one more consideration which assures that your car will be protected by the greatest structure ever built by man. At this point, we are beginning construction on the Queen's Pyramids, all in a neat, even row.
Would that my queens themselves were so orderly.
Three nights running, we have not exhausted the treasure. I told you we were moving up in the world. Didn't I? It was everything you said.
Relate another story to him, Jedefra. He was so impressed by the last one.
It took me weeks to learn it, Mother, and even if I tell another story, your Dedef will only tell a better one. Anyway, Kawab is my father's favorite. He is the one who will someday be the king, not I.
Nothing is impossible, my son.
I never know what to do.
Try to act a part. Even Khafre behaves more regally than you, and he has no chance compared to yours.
Great Khufu, master of the two lands!
My father's tomb?
The plundering of my grandfather's tomb is a matter of grave concern to the well-being of his car and the stability of Ma'at. But, like a true scholar, An-Kap learned from all he encountered.
As a result of the unfortunate occurrence at Dashur, Your Majesty, we are taking several decisive steps. First, we are moving your father's resting place to a site where he will have the best protection.
Whatever treasures and possessions were lost can be replaced, as long as his body remains intact for his car to recognize.
Right, sir.
And then what of my tomb, Aga? It will be even more attractive to robbers than my father's.
I have studied the problem at great length, my lord, and have come up with the following solution.
It was here that An-Kap's brilliance shone forth, with a plan so innovative and daring.
Virtually every other pyramid follows the basic plan of a passageway from the north, leading directly down to the burial chamber cut out of the rock below ground, as we have already constructed here. But in this case, it will foil any tomb robbers, because we will move the location of your father's eternal resting place to the very heart of the pyramid. Huge stones will block and conceal the real entrance, and halfway up the actual passage, another corridor will divert intruders to this empty room here, leading them to believe that the tomb has already been plundered. Little will they suspect that just above the ceiling here, a grand gallery leads to the true tomb high above.
Secure in the knowledge that everything was under control, and that every imaginable detail had been attended to, my father and I left them to discuss the construction. The king could now rest easy.
Yes, but can we rest easy?
What do you mean?
Though the robbers of Sneferu's tomb were captured, and most of his treasure recovered, they had already destroyed his body.
Oh, dear.
But the king is unaware of this.
Oh, dear.
If he knew that his father's sacred car was now homeless,
Say no more.
this must remain our secret for eternity.
To build such difficult, expensive, and obviously monumental structures solely for the dead may seem a misplaced priority on a modern scale of values. But tomb building for the monarch was so inextricably tied to Egyptian life and thought that these structures must be understood in a much broader context. For one thing, the pyramid was the means by which the dead king climbed to the sky, a sort of ladder to the heavens, if you will. And then there was another important theological teaching. It held that the universe itself came from a pyramidal hill, which may offer some clue to the meaning and significance of the pyramid shape to the ancient Egyptians. Before the Egyptians built great pyramids of stone, high officials and even kings were buried in chambers under rectangular stone structures called mastabas. The mastaba remained the burial form of the well-to-do almost until the end of the Old Kingdom. But around 2650 BC, an architect and vizier named Imhotep designed for his king Zoser a truly elaborate tomb, and created the world's first great monument in stone, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. Previously, the use of stone in buildings had been limited. Most structures were made of mud brick. But here at Saqqara, we see the first architectural expression of the need to preserve the dead king in a tomb that would last forever. Zoser's pyramid is made up of 6 rectangular mastabas of decreasing size, one on top of the other. Underneath is the tomb chamber. From an engineering standpoint, the step pyramid was somewhat tentative. Blocks were cut small for ease of handling. Steep inclines were avoided. But the overall effect is stunning. Around the pyramid, there's a vast array of buildings constructed for important ceremonial purposes. And the entire complex was surrounded by a massive wall, nearly half a mile long and 33 feet high. Xoshu's immediate successors opted for step pyramids of their own, but none were ever completed. This is Meidum, and the pyramid behind me was thought for many years to have belonged to Huni, the grandfather of Khufu. Recent scholarship now points to the possibility that it is yet another pyramid belonging to Sneferu, Huni's son and the father of Khufu. He was a busy guy. Meidum was begun as a 7-stepped pyramid and later enlarged to 8. After the king's death, the steps were filled in and the whole thing covered from top to bottom with smooth casing stones. The result was the first true pyramid. Beside its slope, Meidum also contained all the elements found in later pyramid complexes. A valley temple, now buried where the dead king was embalmed, was connected by this causeway to another temple adjacent to the pyramid where important pre-burial ceremonies took place. After burial, this is where daily offerings were brought and elaborate rituals performed. There was also a space about 10 yards deep between the temple and the pyramid in which 2 stelae dedicated to the king were displayed. The entrance to the underground tomb chamber was positioned above ground level on the pyramid's northern face. A narrow descending passage, this one is 190 feet long, leads to the tomb itself. The entrance was originally plugged with giant boulders and covered with casing stones to hide its location. And there is an additional feature this pyramid shares with the others, which is that despite all the effort that went into its construction, it failed to keep the tomb robbers out. When they were finally completed, pyramids and pyramid temples like this one at Giza were great hubs of activity. These temples used to be beautiful buildings, filled with statues and covered with wall decorations. The entire pyramid complex was designed to be perpetually maintained, and this required a sizable staff of priests and retainers, as well as workers to sustain them. Pyramid complexes became almost like small cities, cities for the maintenance, the worship, and the preservation of the God King.
Today marks the 20th year of construction on this plain of Giza. It is gratifying to see that many of the workers who began this project still labor here today in the service of the king. With my father's pyramid so well underway, it was time to begin work on the temple, in which he would be prepared by his priests for the afterlife.
Nebka, now that we have completed the pyramid temple, we're almost out of granite.
But that will be taken care of when Prince Kawab returns from his latest expedition to Nubia. Won't it?
Yes, let us hope so.
Noble Prince, we have seen Nubian warriors in the hills.
Ah, pay them no mind.
But great Prince Kawab, they appear to be heavily armed and prepared to attack.
Do you forget that I am the son of the living god Khufu? Those nomads cannot harm us. Forward, I say.
Pay for this outrage. Those who offend the majesty of Re, 1,000 times over, they will pay. This is the word of Khufu.
The loss of my cherished brother, Kawab, weighs heavily upon my father. He worries for Maat and the stability of his world, when it will be his time to leave it.
At least you may take heart in having other fine sons who can take up the golden wings of Horus after you.
But it was Ankaf who had to tell my father that I, the next in line, had decided I could not be his successor. Trained my entire life as a scholar and scribe, I knew I could not fulfill the godly role of king. And so my younger brother, Balfra, will now someday take his place.
But Dedef wishes to remain a scholar and scribe, and has told your father he will not be king. This leaves Neretiti's third son, Balfra, to come before you in line.
Then what chance can there possibly be for me, Mother?
What chance was there for Balfra while Cowherd lived? Your thoughts are not grand enough, my son. That is your only problem.
It was not long after Cowherd's tragic passing that my 3 brave and royal brothers set out on a leopard hunt. Balfra, I am told, was envious of the noble animal Khafra had slain, but Jedefra generously confided to him where he might find an even greater leopard. When they discovered Crown Balfra, he was dead. The huge leopard he sought was never found. And when my poor brother Jedefra had to relate the sad events to my father Khufu, his grief was unbounded.
Father?
At last, the prize is in sight. You, my son, will be the next king.
Rebellion in the south, the plundering of my grandfather's tomb, the loss of Kawab and now Balfra. Mart is surely out of balance and needs to be restored at once. If not, then what? It is even possible my father's pyramid would not be completed within his life on earth.
I have given these matters much thought, my lord. I have heard of a wise old magician, Dedi by name, a man of 110 years, who lives not one day's boat ride from here. It is said of him that he even knows how to reattach a head that has been cut off, and has predicted many things in his life. Surely he will know what is to become of your reign and your royal issue.
Dedef, my son, go yourself, and bring this Dedi here to me.
We stayed the rest of the day in Dedi's village and accepted the hospitality of his household. For me, it was an experience to be remembered and cherished, as I had never before been afforded the opportunity to observe how common people live. And the next morning, Dedi appeared before the king, my father, to tell him what his magic had discerned. Would any of Khufu's issue survive to be king? And would his great dynasty continue?
Sovereign Khufu, my lord, may you live, prosper, and be in health. Your dynasty will not end yet. I see 2 of your issue who will assume the mantle of Horus as king of all the land.
Thanks be to Re, my father.
One will rule a brief time only. He will be reviled in his own time, and defamed when he is gone. The other will be strong and brave. He will rule for many years, and Egypt will grow even greater under him. He will do you honor and guard your sacred house of eternity. And his proud face will be known until the end of time.
But I have many children yet. Which are the 2 of whom you speak?
There are some things not even a magician may know.
And it was not long afterward that the wise old Dedi took leave of this earth himself, leaving behind a mystery that only time could now unravel.